All right, Bigger Pockets community. Andrew Cushman, happy to be back with you. It's been a little while. I think it was the end of last year, the last time we got to interact live on Instagram and on Facebook. So, what are we going to be talking about this time? Well, for the next 8 weeks, we're going to be doing an 8 week series on how to buy your first or 10th multifamily property, right? Lots of people looking to get started. You've been hearing the success stories of multifamily for the last 10 years, and everyone's doing all this awesome stuff in multifamily. So we're going to talk about how do you not only can you get your first deal in this market, but even if you've already got a bunch of deals, how do you keep getting deals? How do you get bigger deals? How do you decide what kind of properties do you want? Where do you get them? How do you put a team together? All these kind of things. So we're going to cover that one topic at a time over the next 8 weeks. And the best part about this format is it's not just a thing where you just sit and listen and take notes and hopefully we talk about what you want, because you can ask questions. So please jump in, ask questions, post them in the comments section, and I will get to as many of those as we can. I'll try to stop along the way and answer questions, especially if they're relevant to exactly what we're talking about. And then if somehow I miss your question, go ahead, make sure you hang around to the end, because we'll definitely leave time to try to catch up on those questions. So feel free to repost it at that point. Say, hey, Andrew, back in the beginning, you talked about this. How does that apply to me? Or whatever your question was, or maybe you have a follow-up question. Say we can get that at the end if we missed it. So again, we're going to talk about what are the steps to get your first or 10th multifamily deal. We're going to jump into a presentation here in just a minute. A couple of things. When you post, please do let us know where you're posting from. I love hearing from people all over the country and all over the world. We've had people from Israel, Germany. I'm looking for that person who's hanging out in Antarctica. I haven't had that happen yet, but hopefully it will someday. And let us know where you're coming from. Ask your questions. Give us feedback on how if this is valuable, how valuable it is, and what you would like to see moving forward. So, hey, all right, Andrew from Norway. Awesome. I've been kayaking in Norway. It was one of my top 3 favorite trips I've ever taken in my entire life. We kayaked the fjords. So, all right, well, we're going to go ahead and jump into the presentation. I am going to do my best to work in your questions as they come up. And again, if I miss it, hang in there and we will get them at the end. Hello, Caesar in Orange County, California, right close to where I am. So, all right, today we're going to be, over the next 8 weeks, we're going to be talking about 8 steps to buy your first or 10th multifamily property. And we're going to break those down. We're going to do one basic step at a time for each week. And here's the 8 steps. So number 1 is choosing a market, right? And that's a frequent question. Well, geez, how do I pick a market? I live in LA and it's too expensive, or I live in, Dayton, Ohio, and everyone says it's not a good market. How do you pick a market? Step 2 next week is going to be building a team. The 3rd week is going to be screening properties, saying, okay, great, I've got, 30 emails a week of all these deals. How do I pick which ones to spend time on, right? Number 4, the 4th week is going to be underwriting. Like, cool, I've identified a great market. This deal looks really good. How do I actually underwrite this thing? And then when you underwrite it and you're like, wow, this is a great deal. Week 5, what goes into making that offer, right? In the commercial world, it's called a letter of intent. And then when they accept your letter of intent, now you actually get a contract, or PSA, purchase and sale agreement. So we're going to go over, how do you write those up? What goes into them? How do you negotiate them? What are some tips and tactics to make sure that the advantage is yours in those contracts, so you don't get caught up by some legal term that someone puts in there that you you didn't realize what that meant until it was too late. So that's week 5. Week 6 is cool. You've got this thing under contract. Now what? You got to do inspections, physical inspections, legal. You can talk with the city. It's just all what goes into due diligence, and how the steps that we go through, the checklist that we use, all the various factors that go into this. Number 7, the 7th week, is financing and debt strategy. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, is not matching the debt with the business plan for the property, right? You don't want to put on a 10-year loan with a huge prepayment penalty if you're going to sell it in 2 years, right? So how, what kind of financing are available? How do you qualify for it? Can you do it yourself? Do you need a partner? What are all the aspects of getting the proper financing? And then number 8 is actually kind of a bonus week, and that's asset management, right? You've heard the phrase that in real estate, you make money when you buy, and that's partially true with apartments and commercial real estate. But the real money is made in managing that asset in increasing income and net operating income and getting it into the position where you can sell it for the most amount of money. So those are the 8 weeks that we're going to break this up into. Looking forward to getting a bit more of a deep dive than we used to be able to do on previous sessions. And again, make sure you post your questions in the comments. I will get to them on Instagram. They scroll through kind of fast, so I'll occasionally check back. But on Facebook, they're really easy to go back and look. So if you can jump over to Facebook, definitely recommend doing that. So all right. With that said, and hello, we had someone from Hawaii. Maybe you're out there hanging out with Brandon and David Green and the whole crew that Bigger Pockets is taking over the island of Maui. So let's see here. All right, jumping right in, choosing a market, right? That's one of the most common things is like, oh my gosh, there's 50 states and all these MSAs. How do I even decide where I'm going to invest? So some basic questions to ask. Number one, what are your goals? Hey, Naomi from Massachusetts. I used to live in Massachusetts. What are your goals? Are you looking to buy a couple of fourplexes to add to your overall portfolio and keep working your W-2 job? Are you looking to get into syndication and do a couple thousand units and build a business out of it, right? Because what your overall goals are, begin with the end in mind, right? That's going to help dictate where, how you build your business. And owning a couple of fourplexes and maybe managing them yourself is a very different thing than saying, I'm going to try to get 4,000 units and have employees and staff and all this kind of thing. Getting right, we already kind of alluded to this. You got to ask yourself, what size property are you looking for? Are you looking to buy a 150 unit property, or are you looking to buy a fourplex, or maybe a duplex, or maybe you want to buy a whole bunch of duplexes, right? Maybe I've talked to lots of investors who love fourplexes, and they like to build a portfolio of them, right? So if you live in, let's just pick a market. Let's say you live in or near Atlanta, all right? And you're like, you know what? I just want to kind of get a handful of properties that I can manage myself and hold for the long term. And I really there's some great opportunities on fourplexes here. Well, then, hey, you know what? You might just say, Atlanta's a great market. I live here. I have advantage of living here. I know the market. And I'm going to pick Atlanta because there's lots of opportunity and it's a going market. If you live in San Francisco, you want to buy, fourplexes, it's going to be a lot tougher to make that cash flow there, right? So that's when you say, all right, well, okay, do I go look at Sacramento, or do I go look at Boise, Idaho? And you can say, all right, well, I want a market that's big enough where I can collect these fourplexes and build a portfolio. But not so big that I'm competing with tons of people and I can't get a deal, right? So what size property are you looking at will help dictate where you go. If you're looking at big stuff, 100 units, 200 units, you can really kind of go to almost any market because those properties are big enough where you can hire on-site staff to be there managing it for you, right? So location and distance from where you are tends to change a little bit. Hello, Nate from Atlanta. Speaking of Atlanta. Next part, what we just mentioned, self-manage or hire a management company. I'm a big believer in third-party management, especially for large properties. But if you're going to self-manage, you don't want to do that from across the country. So, if you live in Salt Lake City and you're going to self-manage, you might want to stick with Salt Lake City or St. George or something that you can drive to and get access to. One mistake I see people make is trying to self-manage small properties from far away. That gets very difficult. So again, are you going to self-manage or hire a management company? Let's see, how far do you want to travel? Right? If I've met lots of investors who are like, hey, as long as I can drive there in 4 hours, I'm good. Okay, then that determines the radius of markets that you might pick. You might be like, no, I want it backyard. I want to be able to get there in 20 minutes. Okay, that's going to factor into your market. And then also demographic trends. Within real estate investing in general, you want to have a tailwind. You want to you want to have a wind at your back, so that even if you make mistakes, your odds are greater for success, right? So Brandon gave a great analogy on the podcast a few weeks ago. Whereas if you're gonna paddle a canoe, right, you can go upstream, downstream, or across a flat lake. Well, if your goal is to cover distance as much as possible, the easiest way to do that is to paddle downstream, right, with the current. Whereas if you're going up current or against the current, it's going to take a lot more effort and you're going to cover a lot less distance, right? And there's a lot of different applications of that, but kind of look at it that way. You want to be in a place where the demographic trends are in your favor: increasing incomes, increasing jobs, and increasing population growth. So, all right, I'm going to pause there for a second, grab a few questions off Instagram. If you're on Facebook, please go ahead, post your comments in the comments section, and we will address those as we can. All right, let's see. Chris Lortiz on Instagram. Is it better with local properties driving distance? Yeah, if you're going to do local properties and you're going to self-manage, then you would want to do driving distance. But keep in mind, it also, flights these days can make things in a sense local, right? So for me living in the LA area, I can be in Atlanta in 4.5 hours on a direct flight. So Atlanta is not that tough. Now, I wouldn't want to own a fourplex in Atlanta and have to fly out there every time something was going on. But that it's kind of a factor of your availability. So if you can, if you're good with driving 2 hours, great. If you're good with driving 5 hours, then that's kind of your limit. But the closer they are to you, the easier it's going to be if you're self-managing. Let's see. Robert on Facebook says, is it profitable to change single families into multifamily 10-to-1 ratio? How does the 1031 work in this kind of application? That's not quite so much in terms of choosing a market. You can do go from 10 single into a multifamily. And again, if you're going to do that, make sure you get that multifamily in the right market. As far as actual 1031s, you talk to a custodian that does that, just to make sure that they can get all the mechanics right for you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide here. Next thing to consider in picking a market is, what are your goals? And again, I mentioned this before, begin with the end in mind. So number one, how much time do you have, right? If you can jump into real estate full time, then that really gives you a lot more ability to just, pick a market that is just based on other criteria, not necessarily how close it is. You can, really opens things up. But if you've got a W-2 job, full-time job that you love, or that you want to stay at, or that you can't leave just yet, then you're gonna have to factor in, well, geez, I can only spend 3 hours a day on this, right? So, I can't be, I can't be, flying to Atlanta, twice a week because I can't leave my job. So how much time do you have to commit to the process? Next is, how much capital do you have? Deciding on, how big of a property are you going to buy? Do you have 300,000? Do you have 3 million? And it doesn't have to be your money, right? Can you raise 300,000 or can you raise 3 million? How much risk can you tolerate? So that'll get into, do you want to buy C properties, right? Do you want to buy A properties? If you're looking, how much market risk do you want, right? So, for example, how do you factor this into choosing a market? Well, if you have kind of a low risk tolerance and you don't want to be subject to potential swings in the market, then you might want to pick what's called a linear market, such as maybe like a Columbus, Ohio, or Little Rock, Arkansas, where you don't tend to have big ups and downs, but they tend to just kind of chug along and move, just a little bit of appreciation, a little bit of growth kind of every year. And they just kind of move along in a line versus, Los Angeles, where rents and prices go way up. And then during the pandemic, they came way down. And then now they're going back up. And, you've got other risks in markets like that, where, you can have an earthquake, or, the government comes out and says, you can't evict anybody for the next 24 months. So, there's different risks to different markets. So that's another factor in choosing your market, is your comfort level with risk. Let me see here. And then also, what are your strengths, right? If one of your strengths is that you live in a market that's good for investing and you know that market inside and out, you've lived there for 10 years, 20 years, that is something you should factor into when selecting a market, right? So if you live in Atlanta and you've lived there forever and you know that market and you're saying, well, okay, I've heard Atlanta's good, I've heard Phoenix is good, I've heard Dallas is good. Hey man, how do I pick a market? I would strongly consider the market that you live in, right? Atlanta, because you already know that market. Or if you happen to live in Dallas, you could say, well, I want to go out to Atlanta or whatever. Well, if you know Dallas, that's a tactical advantage. So that's something to ask, what is your strength? Or maybe, maybe you are really good at, underwriting, or and you can connect with people in another market and just and say, all right, well, I'm really good at this underwriting, and I'm going to bring someone onto my team or find some network with somebody on bigger pockets, and they can be boots on the ground in Phoenix or wherever you're investing. So, all right, let me grab. Hello, El Congri from Columbus, Ohio. Me 60, hello from Oklahoma. I'll make sure I'm going to try to stick with questions that are mostly on topic to what we're talking about right here. And then if we have time at the end, we can come back and hit some of these other ones. Let me see. Just getting started. All right, Nate Bartlett on Instagram. Just getting started, but I'm starting to see where the good neighborhoods are here. Good job. I just moved here from Chicago a few years ago, so a bit of a learning curve. Nate didn't say where he was from, but that gets right into what we were just talking about. If you are in a market, that's a tactical advantage and should really get into should be factored into choosing that market. So although again, it's not the only thing. I know LA. And part of the reason I don't invest in LA is because I know LA. So, all right, what size property are you looking at? We touched on this a little bit already, so I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit more, faster. But are you looking for condos, duplexes, small apartments? Are you looking for 10 to 25 units, 25 to 80, or big stuff, 80 plus? And some markets are skewed towards certain sizes, right? So, for example, there's some markets in the Florida Panhandle where there are tons of 10 to 25 unit properties. And the Florida Panhandle has got great demographic trends. People are moving there. Incomes are going up. Jobs are increasing. I actually heard that the Florida economy is now stronger than it was before COVID, right? So if you're looking for 10 unit properties, maybe you consider a market in the Florida Panhandle. If you're looking for big stuff, 100 plus, you might want to consider a larger market like, again, Dallas, Columbus, Ohio, Atlanta, Phoenix, Boise, Idaho. Small cities are going to have less large properties, whereas the bigger cities, of course, are going to have a higher inventory of properties for you to choose from. So, and part of that too is just getting down and getting to know your market a little bit, right? So if you said, hey, I want to focus on 10 to 25 unit properties, these 4 markets are of interest to me, so I'm going to dive into these markets and see which of them has a large amount of 10 to 25 unit properties that I might be able to buy. So. All right. Next up is, are you looking to self-manage or hire a third-party management company? And we've talked a little bit about this already, but if you are going to self-manage, I highly recommend staying local. It gets much more difficult to self-manage from a distance because there are definitely points where you need somebody on your team needs to be physically able to access and see the property, right? So some of the things to consider with third party is, number one, they already have the systems and the staff in place. So there was a question on Instagram earlier that we didn't get to address, and it was basically like, hey, what are some great property management tools for self-managing, right? So if you hire a third party, they're already going to have all those systems in place. They're going to have the systems for paying rent. Well, assuming you hire a competent property management company, which we'll get to in this series, but they're going to have the systems in place for rent collection. They're going to have the systems in place for handling maintenance requests. They're going to have the systems in place for collecting collecting rent. I think I already said maintenance. They're hopefully have systems in place for managing the rehab, for screening residents, for moving them in, for debt collect, all that kind of stuff. They're going to have that in place, and you can leverage their systems and scale and effectively outsource that, right? So that's definitely one of the positives of third party. A second positive of third party is they should be experts in whatever market you've picked, right? So if you live in Seattle and you're investing in Dallas and you hire a third party management company that's been managing in Dallas for 15 or 20 years, they should have extensive market knowledge, and you leverage that, right? That's how we went into Atlanta 10 years ago from California. Is we found a property management company where the owners and the people in that company, they know Atlanta like the back of their hand. And so we could call them up and say, hey, we're looking at this property on 54th Street. What do you think? Oh, that's a great area. The 2 blocks down, they're building this, and new construction's moving closer every year. Or we've called them up and said, hey, what do you think about this? And they're like, just run away, don't even think about it, right? And that's the sign of a great property management company, when they tell you, hey, they don't want your business on a certain property, because they know they're telling you the truth, right? They're not just trying to get another property to manage. So those are some of the pros. Some of the cons of third-party property management. And again, if you can't tell, I'm a big proponent of third-party property management. But some of the downsides that you'll hear people talk about is, oh, well, you don't have control. And that is true, right? Because generally they're handling a lot of the day-to-day. And so, you don't have 100% control, because they're processing the invoices, they're processing the rent collections, they're sending you, the reports and all of that. That's not all coming directly through your hands. And, one of the arguments is, well, I care more about my property more than anybody else will. So I want to be in control. My counter to that is caring doesn't equal competence. Meaning, so just because I care about something doesn't mean I'm really good at it, right? So I care about rent collection big time, because that determines how profitable my properties are. But I'm not going to be good at knocking on doors and trying to convince people to pay their rent on time. So we bring in we use third party management, and we hire managers that are really good at that, right? So you do give up some control, but on the other side, you're gaining leverage, and also you're gaining freedom of location, right? You don't have to be in that location to do the management. Now, some of the positives of managing assets yourself is self-management can work better than third-party management on smaller properties, right? If you've got a fourplex, sometimes, as an owner, there's a good chance you will manage that better than a third-party property management company, right? Because the economies of scale aren't quite there in a larger property. So when you're looking at markets and saying, okay, what market do I want to go into? Being your ability to find the right property management partner is a huge decision maker, right? So for us, for example, we like the Southeast US for all kinds of reasons that we'll touch on throughout the series. But one of the reasons we also like that footprint is our property management partner, who's a third party. They cover that entire region. And we know that if we find a great deal in that market, that they can manage the heck out of that property for us, and in turn make us and our investors a lot of money, right? So the ability of good management companies definitely factors into our markets. And I'll give you an example on the other side of how this can, how this can not work out is, and I know another investor who a couple of years ago bought 2 properties in a tertiary market in Texas. And that market it's a little bit out there. And, the deal itself really wasn't too bad. It was, definitely had potential, but they have absolutely struggled with management companies, and they've had to fire a couple of them. They can't get good staff, and that investor ended up literally personally moving to the property to try to run it. And that is the absolute last thing you want to do as an investor. You're as an investor, your high dollar value activity is finding and doing deals, right? Not sitting in an office filling out paperwork for your tenants. So the ability to find a property management company that fits what you're doing goes into your market. Don't buy in a market where you can't solve the management issue, right? Meaning you either can get great third-party property management, or it's a market where you can effectively self-manage. So, if I found a deal that looked like a great deal, but it was in a market where I don't think I can get good management, I will pass on that deal, because bad management will turn a great deal bad in no time. So, all right. Well, we've got a bunch of questions here. We've stacked up on Instagram. Let me see if I can get to a couple of those. Don't forget, on Facebook, post your questions as well. I'm seeing lots of hearts on Instagram, so hopefully that means that you guys like what we're talking about. And if so, please keep that up, because it lets us know that we're on the right track. And again, if we miss something, post it in the question, and we'll try to get to it. So, all right. Incredible says, does anyone have a great real estate agent in Atlanta? Will be there next month for a week. I know lots of great commercial agents. So if you're looking for larger multifamily properties, just shoot me an email or message me on BP, and I'll be happy to mention some of those. Let's see. Chris O'Lord says, what are good indicators of growth in markets such as South Florida cities? You know what? We're actually about to get into that. So let me just jump forward a slide here, and we'll answer that question. So actually, that's me in a couple of slides, but we've kind of already talked about this, so we'll go through it fairly quickly. But, we talked about how far do you want to go, right? Local, nearby, or out of state. Where are you located? How much do you want to travel? Where do you have connections? So like for me, I end up traveling to the Southeast US anywhere from 4 to 6 times a year. And I try to pack as much into those trips as I can. And I'm comfortable with that amount of travel. If that sounds like a nightmare to you, don't invest in the other side of the country, unless you have partners there who can handle everything for you, and you won't need to go out, right? So if that, at the same time, like for example, we have properties, as I mentioned, in the Florida Panhandle, right? Well, these things are like 3 miles from some of the nicest beaches in the country, and candidly, it's not all that miserable to visit those places, right? So if that kind of travel sounds good, well, okay, then you want to consider those markets. But if you're like, hey, I don't want to have to drive more than 2 hours, I definitely don't want to have to get on a plane, then you're going to say, all right, well, what markets within a 2-hour driving radius are available? And you're going to choose those, right? And again, third point that we mentioned is, where do you have connections? That plays heavily into it. If you've already got connections in the market, that's easier than building new team or connections from scratch. So, all right, Chris, this addresses the questions that you were asking. What are good indicators of growth in markets such as South Florida cities? So that was the question on Instagram. So we're looking for demographic trends. The number one thing that we look for is population growth, right? So as a new investor, you can get that information from lots of sites, USA.com. And then there's another site called worldpopulationreview.com. You can go to there and get population growth. Also, if you just Google any city combined with the words population growth, you'll usually get several results. In fact, most of the time, those results are from World Population Review. That's how I ended up using that site. But let's say Detroit 10-year population growth, right? And boom, you'll get a chart for it. So what you want to see is, at minimum, positive population growth, and ideally, you want to see population growth that's greater than the national average. So I believe the national average in population growth over the last 10 years is 0.66%. So if you pull up a market and the population growth is 1%, that tells you that market is growing faster than the national average. And if people are moving there, then that means there's more demand for housing. Again, whether you're looking at a 400 unit or a fourplex, these things all apply the same. So the more people that are moving there, the more demand there is for your rental unit, which increases the likelihood that with that increased demand, your rents are going to go up over time. And if your rents go up over time, the value of your property is going to go up over time. So you're going to create additional cash flow and additional equity by buying in markets with population growth. This is absolutely huge. The next one on here, number 2, median income. There's a handful of places where you can get this. And again, anything that I talk about, if you forget, like I'm gonna try to give you guys some specific resources that you can jump into. But if you forget what that resource is, just don't forget, Google is basically all knowing, right? So you can Google Detroit median income, and click a few links, follow a few rabbit trails, and you're probably going to get the information that you need. But for median income, there's a website called richblockspoorblocks.com. And you can go on there, and it will, I believe you can get a certain number of free searches, and then it used to be $50 a year for access. What we really like about that site is it's not just here's a big radius, right? Because that can be deceiving. It breaks it down by median income by neighborhood, and because you want to look at what's the median income in the neighborhood where your property is located, right? Because most of your residents, 80% of them are going to come from within 2 miles of where the property is located. We used a site called per data provider called Esri, ESRI, to $100 a year, so it's more than worth it. And it gives us the median income, again, by zip code and by neighborhood. So why is that important, right? Why am I talking about median income when I'm talking about selecting markets? Well, I don't, how do those two things come into play? Well, where that comes into play is you want to make sure you are buying in a market where, we've already talked about, you've said, okay, I want to buy 10 units and I want to get B class 10 units, and I want to get this many of them, and this in a market where the population growth is 1% or greater. And so let's say you've got all that, and now you're saying, well, okay, if my rent is X amount, you want to look at the median income to determine, well, can people afford it, right? So let's give an example. Affordability is generally, there's a number of metrics, but if a person can spend 25% roughly of their gross income on annual rent, then that rent is considered to be affordable, right? So how do you apply that when choosing a market? We say, all right, well, I am looking at, I don't know, let's say McDonough, which is a suburb south of Atlanta. And I'm looking at a 10-unit property, and the rents are $835 a month. And so that works out to $10,000 a year. So, okay, is that affordable or not? Well, $10,000 is 25% of $40,000. So what you do is you say, okay, if I'm buying this property, I want the median income in this neighborhood to be $40,000 or more, which means that the median person in that neighborhood can easily afford your rental property, right? So you're always gonna have a good deep rental pool, which is gonna help keep you well occupied. So that's where median income comes into, right? Also, generally speaking, there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, as median income goes down, crime and headache of management goes up, and it's almost exponential. The further you get below about 35,000, at least in the Southeast, that headache and crime factor tends to go up really, really, really high. So for us, we won't buy in any market where the median income is below 35,000. That number is going to change for you, but that is a big piece of how you choose what markets you're going to be in. There are some markets I can think of, for example, Albany, Georgia, where large chunks of the area is very low income. So we just don't look at that market because we know the vast majority of it's not going to qualify. Whereas other markets, like Henry County in Georgia, where huge chunks of it exceed the median income. There's some great markets in Florida where, again, most of the market has got a pretty high median income, right? So that factors into how do you select your market is what is the median income there, and has it been increasing over time, right? Job growth is another one. And this is one where just go straight to Google, right? Just say, Google Detroit job growth, Dallas job growth. and say, well, our company's moving there, right? So I mean, if you've been on Bigger Pockets or in the real estate world for any reasonable amount of time, there's tons of corporate relocations to Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Phoenix, Atlanta, all those cities, right? So you're looking for places where companies are moving, or there's organic job growth, right? Like existing businesses are expanding and adding jobs, because as more jobs are created and more jobs move in, that's more renters, right? Even people who are gonna buy a house, when they move to a new market, they typically will rent for at least a year before they buy that house, right? So you're looking for job growth, and one of the best things about being in the multifamily business right now is there is a long-standing housing shortage. And so if you're in a market where there's already a housing shortage and there's population growth and job growth, that housing shortage is probably going to get worse, which works in your favor as a landlord. So you're looking for population growth, median income that's above a certain level, job growth, and the fourth thing is a diverse industry. So what do I mean by diverse industry? Generally speaking, you want to be very careful, or even I would say possibly stay away from markets that are a one-horse town, right? We looked at a property one time, I believe it was in North or South Carolina, which overall are great markets, by the way, but it was a rural town, and in something like, I think it was like 55% of the residents at the property all worked at the same poultry plant a mile down the street. And so you got to ask yourself, well, what happens if that poultry plant closes? Well, 55% of your residents just lost their job. So how's that going to impact collections, right? And then that was the primary employer in the town. It was like half the job base of the entire town. So you want to look for a diverse industry. Ideally, only a very small. I'm sorry, not diverse industry. Diverse industry within a market, right? So ideally, if you pull up the jobs for a particular market, you'd like to see a few percent here, a few percent there, and you're really a balanced out economy. Maybe some in energy, health, medical. Those are really good stable jobs. Higher education, military is good, tends to be very stable. Be a little bit careful if there's too much military, because they can get a big deployment and you can lose a lot of people, or they can close the base. And there's some areas of Atlanta where they closed bases years ago. And a decade plus later, they're still trying to figure out what to do with those vacant bases. Now they're converting them into things like movie studios and things like that, and it's a plus. But if you had a property right next to that back when they closed it, you were in a world of hurt. So try to find a market with diverse industry and economy. And of course, the question is always, how do you determine that? Again, just go to Google. We haven't found necessarily one site that's all knowing for that. We'll just Google Dallas top 10 employers, or top 10 economic sectors, right? And it'll give you that information. So those are the main things. Again, population growth, median income, job growth, and you want a diverse industry. So again, getting into population growth, if you're looking to get started, you have no idea what market you want to get into. One of the best ways to pick a market, if you're starting from scratch, is to just automatically go to markets that are growing and that have great population growth. And you say, well, Andrew, okay, that's nice. How do I do that? Good news is I've got a free resource for you. I know you can't read this stuff on the screen because it's super small, but that's okay. You don't need to. The key takeaway is go to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. Just Google that. Again, it's the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. And if you can see the screen I'm showing and all, you'll see this pretty color-coded map where it's green and white and red. And what this is showing you is population growth for the entire U.S. by county, right? So if you're looking to pick a market and say, well, all right, I know population growth is one of the most important things, so let's just go find a market that has a bunch of markets that have population growth, and then I'll narrow it down from there. This is where you do that. It's free, it's easy, and it's super clear, right? So if you can see the map, but you look at it, you'll see much of Florida is green, Arizona is green. Some of the counties in Idaho and Utah that you've probably been hearing about are green too. Those are areas where you have above average population growth. So if you're looking for a market, go write down 10 of those counties and say, okay, I'm going to start with these 10, and then I'm going to go look at the other factors that Andrew was just talking about, right? So this is a great interactive chart. It's very easy to navigate once you find it. And on the flip side, I would stay out of any counties that are pink or red. That means those areas are losing population. And over time, there's going to be less and less renters there, less and less demand for your units, which means you're going to have really hard time getting rental growth, right? So this is one of my favorite tools. Again, it's free. It's very easy to use. And if you're getting started saying, how do I choose a market? This would be the first place to go. Once you've decided like how far away you're going to go from home and all that kind of stuff, go here and figure out what your population growth looks like and put yourself at an advantage by investing in an area where you've got really good population growth. All right, employment trends. We already kind of talked about this. I'm just going to give a few more resources. So check for news stuff. You can Google things like Phoenix job relocations or Phoenix corporate relocations. There's also what's called a WARN report, WARN. Those are by state, and that gives it collects announcements for plant closings, right? Because there's job growth, but then there's no one tends to announce when jobs are being lost. Everyone always just talks about, hey, yeah, we got another 1,000 jobs, and they don't really want to announce that, well, we also lost 2,000 when this other plant closed. So if you go to the WARN reports, again, just Google it, WARN, it will tell you or warn you about jobs that are being lost. So for example, at the Georgia Department of Labor, you just search, Georgia Department of Labor warns reports, and it'll come up, but it's, public-warn/search warrants. It will give you all of the announced job losses and plant closings for the state by market, right? So that's another resource for employment trends. Here's a resource, again, median household income. We talked about this a little bit before. You can use richblockspoorblocks.com. I mentioned that. Also, if you're going to be investing on a regular basis, I highly recommend spending $100 for annual subscription to Esri, ESRI, so that you can get the maps that I'm looking at here. Let me see. I think I have a bigger one on the next slide. There you go. So we actually already kind of covered this, but how do you determine your threshold for median income? Well, you either look at richblockspoorblocks.com or go to Esri, get this data, and then you'll see, if for those of you on Facebook, you'll see, and for those on Instagram, I'll just tell you, well, I went ahead and put a couple of highlights here where, at the bottom of the map, there's a neighborhood where the income's 55,000, and at the top of the map, there's a neighborhood where the income is 61,000, right? And so we actually bought properties in these neighborhoods. And the rent is about $1,200 a month, or I'm sorry, about $12,000 a year. And so, okay, well, if the rent's $12,000, how is that affordable to? Who's that affordable to? Well, okay, 12,000 is 25% of 48,000. So someone making 48,000 can afford this easily. Let's see, the median income here is 61,000, and down below it's 55,000. So, awesome. The majority of people in this market can easily afford my apartment complex or property, right, or my fourplex. And if I figure out a way to increase the rents $200 or $300 a month, there's still plenty of people who can afford that rent too. So this is a market that I want to select. And if you on the map that I have pulled up, the vast majority of it is higher income, like 40 to 60,000, which for the South and Southeast is generally considered higher income for especially B-class properties. And that means this is a great market to potentially invest in, because the vast majority of the residents there have median incomes that make your properties affordable. So, all right, just doing a quick recap here, and then we'll try to go back and catch up on questions. So if you're on Facebook, please go ahead, post the questions in the comments. We'll get to those. It can be a question on any of the topics or that we've talked about, or any of the slides from beginning to end. And then same thing on Instagram. Please go ahead and post. And while you're at it, let us know where you're coming in from. and I'll be happy to give you a shout out. And yeah, we'll spend a few minutes answering questions after we do a quick recap here. So, questions to ask yourself. Number one, what are your goals? Are you looking to build a huge business, or just grab a few rentals and call it good? Or is this a part-time thing? Is this a full-time thing? What size properties, right? Do you want a fourplex, or do you want 150 units? What market has a lot of what you are looking for? Are you going to self-manage or hire a management company? If you're going to self-manage, then you probably want to lean towards choosing a market that's local to you. If you're going to go third party, that makes it a lot easier to go really anywhere. So are you going to self-manage or go third party? That's a factor to consider. How far do you want to travel is another one, right? Are you good hopping on a plane every few months and going out and visiting the properties, getting to know a new market, doing some travel? Or do you really want to keep it local? Maybe only drive 2 hours and stick within that radius. So that's another question to ask. Because if your business model is, hey, I don't want to have to travel more than 2 hours, and you live in LA, don't invest in Miami, Florida, because it's going to definitely take you more than 2 hours to get there. And thank you for all the hearts on Instagram. Really appreciate that. And the final one, and by no means the least important, is demographic trends. In fact, I would almost say this is probably the most important, is you want to choose a market based on certain demographic trends, the main ones being positive population growth, ideally above average, job growth, solid median incomes that make your properties affordable, and then diverse industry. So you factor all of those things together, and that will give you the ability to kind of take this. It can be overwhelming, right? If you're like, oh my gosh, how do I even start? How do I pick a market? I don't remember how many thousands of counties there are in the United States, but there's a whole lot. And it can be overwhelming to be like, I don't even know where to start, right? This is how you figure out where to start. Determine what your goals are, what size properties you're looking for. Are you going to manage them or have somebody else do it? How far away do you want to go? And then pull up that map I showed you at the Joint Center for Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. Figure out what counties have good population growth that are in an area that's defined by what we just went over, and then start digging into those areas. And within a couple hours, you can have some great markets that'll be perfect for you to invest in. So I hope that was helpful. Let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and try to catch up on questions here for a few minutes. So let me see here. We have a new pup says Middle Tennessee is exploding. If you're looking for appreciation, look here. You know what? You're absolutely right. Tennessee has been a great market the last few years. Nashville is super hot. Lots of people know that. Chattanooga is another good market. I don't know Tennessee really well. Of course, everyone's heard of Memphis. There's lots of people going there, especially for turnkey rentals. One of the reasons Tennessee is hot is because it's a no income tax state, right? So people who are looking to not pay any state income taxes are moving to Tennessee, and helping to improve the economy. So New Pup also says, I'm in Clarksville, Tennessee. I've actually made offers on property in Clarksville. The areas that we looked at were actually really good. So, all right, let's keep on posting questions. All right, a few funny comments that I'm not going to repeat on air, but I do appreciate the comments there. So. Oh, actually got out of the screen. So, all right, cool. Well, I guess that about wraps it up. Again, hopefully this was helpful. We'll be back next Wednesday again, covering step 2 on getting your first or 10th multifamily property. Look forward to connecting with you then. If there's a question that we missed, or you have another question that you think of afterwards, go ahead and post it in Facebook and tag me so that I get the notification, and I'm happy to engage with you on the Bigger Podcast Facebook page and answer those questions there as well. And we do have a latecomer on Facebook. I'll go ahead and grab this question before we get off. So Debbie Lee, thanks for posting. It says, other great markets with 10 to 25 units. I've seen a lot of good 10 to 25 units in the Florida Panhandle. I'm finding a lot of older cities tend to have a fairly high number of 10 to 25 units, especially stuff built kind of from 1950 to maybe 1980. It seems like lately in the last 20 years, most of the new development has gotten really big because the economies of scale. But Atlanta's got lots of smaller stuff, 10 to 25 units. Dallas, I've seen a lot of stuff. Houston has a lot of 10 to 25 unit properties. There's a fair number of them in the Los Angeles area, but there's a lot of other reasons why I personally don't like investing in LA. Some newer cities like a St. George, Utah, might not have as many of the smaller properties. But then again, sometimes what happens is smaller developers will go out there so that so they can grow and get started, and you'll see more of those that are on the newer side, right? So that kind of gets back to what types of properties you're looking for. But again, if you have no idea. So Debbie, let's say you're like, well, I really want to invest in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Andrew, you've got no information for me. What you do is you go look at the Little Rock, Arkansas MLS and LoopNet in Crexi, which is a commercial listing service, CREXI, and you say, okay, well, how many 10-unit properties are listed? How many of them are on the market? If you're not seeing any, well, that's maybe not the market for you, right? But if you see a fair number of them, then get in touch with those brokers and say, hey, I saw you listed this property. How many of these do you typically sell in a year? How many of them do you list in a year, right? And that's how you can figure out if a market is a target-rich environment for you. So, now we got a bunch more questions popping in. Michelle says St. George is tough right now. It is. Lots of Californians are trying to get into St. George because it's a great market for investing and to live in. It's a nice place, not too far from the Wasatch Mountains and Las Vegas and all the beautiful stuff that's in Utah. All right, let's go ahead. So Dom's asked, how do you choose your management company in new areas you are not yet invested in? Well, the good news is we are going to dive into that in depth. Let's see, let me tell you what week that's going to be. We're actually going to get into that more in depth in week 8, asset management, because your property management company is a big part of that. But the short version that I can answer in 2 minutes here is one, referrals. Build a list of property management companies from referrals. Ask brokers and lenders, who would you hire to manage this company? Interview that list, narrow it down, meet in person with the top 2 or 3. And actually, ideally with the owners of those companies, or at least someone very high up, and then make sure that that company is an expert at the type of asset you are buying. Right? If you don't find a management company that their expertise is 100-unit Class A properties, you don't hire them to manage a Class C 10-unit. Right? They're going to have no idea what they're doing or how to do it, and it's just not going to work out well. So pick a management company that is an expert in your property type and is an expert in that market, and that other people have referred and recommended them to you. That's basically the short version of the process we used, and we've been very fortunate. We've never had a bad property management company. So, all right, thank you for the questions. I really enjoyed being back on BP Live with all of you. Looking forward to doing it again on every Wednesday here for the next 7 weeks. And hopefully by the end, you'll have everything you need to know to go either get your first multifamily or your 10th, or maybe even your 15th or 20th. So until then, thank you. Have a great rest of the week, and we will talk soon. Take care.